So skin surgery, for example, quite happy with that. I've got lovely photographs you wouldn't want to see about me cutting people open. I love it. Living in the country, with nature, with the people, living as a family member. Beautiful. Did you know, for example, that we have an endocannabinoid system throughout our bodies? Every vertebrate has that. Your Valiums, your diazepams, your alprazolams, they're incredibly dangerous if they're used improperly and very easy to get addicted to. Cannabis doesn't.
Morning, Brian. How are you today?
I'm good, Dave. How about yourself?
Oh, look, excellent. It's another lovely day in paradise, is it not?
Life is good.
Absolutely. So welcome back to the chat, and thank you for having me back to the chat. So I'm welcoming myself back. Dr. Brian Walker, politician and the man. So we're going to go into your life just in a section following on from last week. I was thinking about this, and I'm thinking, I'd like to know a little bit about you as a GP in your rural experience.
Well, I've been a GP in a number of countries. I was training in cardiology, of course, when I thought GP is not for me anymore, but then I went back into general practice.
Okay.
And apart from my life in Hong Kong, which was, of course, mostly big city general practice, I've been reasonably remote and rural.
Okay.
So when I came back to Australia, I discovered that as a foreigner in Australia, I grew up here, but as a foreigner, I had to get a visa to get back into Australia, and as a foreign trained doctor, I wasn't allowed to work in the city.
Okay.
So I had to leave my family, my wife and children, and work in the country. So I did. I travelled. I used to work in Broome, Derby, Fitzroy Crossing, Halls Creek, Newman. I've been across in Queensland and Tasmania, and I was sitting in Tasmania a long way away from my wife and children, thinking, this is no good. And I used to work 2 months on, 1 month off, so back for the school holidays, this kind of thing, to be the father again. And so I sat in Tasmania thinking, I need to find something closer to home, and I saw Cannanopan. Now, Cannanopan is a fantastic place in the wheat belt. It's a centre of civilization. Had a hospital there, a general practice, and 3 clinics to look after in Beacon, Bencubben, and Muckenbuden. And it's only 3-hour drive from Perth. I thought, right, I'll try that. Okay. So I went to work in Cannanopan. Yeah. The previous doctor was there 51 years. Wow. John Radonovich, an awesome doctor who did things you wouldn't believe. In fact, our new museum here has probably got a section dedicated to WA country medicine, and John's experience is there in that museum.
It's incredible.
He was a giant among men, but in those days, doctors did that. They would deliver children, they would do operations, colonoscopies. They did the lot.
A lot, yeah.
Okay, so when I went, I had big shoes to fill. And I was, having done so many things, I was actually not too bad at that. But I didn't do the childbirth, because that's been banned, of course, now, because of insurance questions. Okay. So women now have to travel from Cannanopan into the big city to get their children delivered. It's a big deal. You know, it's a big deal if you're working on a farm and your time is due, leaving 2 weeks before to sit in Perth and wait for the child to come.
Can you give the audience a little bit of an understanding, if they haven't been out to the wheat belt, can you just give them an understanding of the distances, the size, the farms, just so people can really get to know what you're talking about?
Well, let's take Cannanopan, which had about 200 people living in it. You travel about, it must have been 60 kilometres to the next doctor in Wildcatcham or Merredin. I would regularly travel up to Beacon, which was an hour's drive away. That's the northernmost part of our patch. Muckenbuden was just a 45-minute drive away. So we're talking here significant journeys for people. If you haven't got a license, say if you've lost your license because of old age or infirmity, you're actually a prisoner. So I used to travel out to these communities, but even then, going to Muckenbuden, someone from Lake Brown, for example, traveling in, was a long distance. Okay, because the farms are big. And my wife, for example, she's a Shanghai girl. And she came out to see Cannanopan shortly after I started there. And we're driving out, and we're driving past Northam, and now the country is there. And now we're past Goomalling, and she's looking at the countryside, and we're driving out, and even further is Dowrin, and she's looking at empty spaces and paddocks. And then, no, we're not near there yet, and we're driving further and further and further out past training into Cannanopan. And we had to go past there to Muckenbuden for the golf day. That's why she came out. So we're driving out past Cannanopan into Muckenbuden. Now, I went there in 1966 as a schoolboy with my good friend to stay at his farm. She'd never been there before, so she's looking, where are all the people? We're coming out to this golf course there to play golf for the charity for the hospital, and there's nothing there. And she's saying, there's no one here. We turn into the golf course, and there everyone is there. The cars are there, the farmers have come from far and wide with their golf clubs, the women have helped with the catering, the typical Country Women's Association. It was awesome. And then one of them took my wife and said, let's take a trip around the town. So she was introduced. The country style, you're one of us now, let's meet the family. And she felt thoroughly at home like that. But from a Shanghai girl with 22 million into a small country town, I'm thinking, wow.
It's incredible.
So that was my place. I really loved Cannabis and still do. And I'm actually, even as a member of parliament now, I look at the wheat belt and all farmers by proxy, you're my people.
Of course.
Because my childhood was spent in Malaysia on a farm, if you like. Yeah, a different type of farm. Yeah. So this is in my blood, actually, helping with the country.
It's interesting what you say. When I was working in mental health, some English nurses came out, a male and a female, and they travelled, you know, that Southern Cross to Kalgoorlie, that couple of 100 Ks, and it's nothing. They literally were freaking out. Yeah. Like seriously nervous, because in England they were saying, or even in America they're saying that there's always people, even out bush, you know. Yep. So it's really, really interesting. So how did that shape your experience as a doctor being in such a remote community?
I felt completely at home. Now, bear in mind, I've had a fair number of experiences. I was used to doing a lot of different things. So skin surgery, for example, quite happy with that. I've got lovely photographs you wouldn't want to see about me cutting people open. I love it. But also managing the accidents which come in, or there's such a wide variety. I mean, someone walking into my clinic acutely suicidal, farming is a hard business, okay? How do you manage that in the context there's no one here? Someone coming in violent into ED and the police are about 40 minutes away. How do you manage that? So you have to be quite comfortable with the uncomfortableness. I found it just a delight to work there. I had my own pharmacy there, could supply the medications, and it was a complete service. Minor X-ray we could do as well. Nothing fancy, of course, because we weren't allowed that, and the nurses had to be trained. And I wasn't trained for X-rays; the nurses were. Awesome system. And the people staffing the hospital were all from the area. They're married in the area or born in the area. They knew everyone. So the old folks who were actually in the hospital, they were family. They weren't strangers, they were family. Bringing people in, and there's a child here with fever and a bit concerned, you're 100 kilometers away, in you come. I'll look after you overnight, maybe 2 nights, see how you're going. You can come and stay with your child. It's this is just gorgeous. I loved that. Living in the country, with nature, with the people, living as a family member. Beautiful.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something that's really important to me personally, because as an ex-mental health clinician working in a government agency in the old days, you know, when burlap underpants were a thing, suicidal. And of course, if you are feeling or experiencing anything like that, please call Lifeline or go to your nearest doctor. And that's of course really important. How did you, as a doctor, how did you deal with someone or manage someone who had such acute mental health issues, being so far away without, you know, the mental health services being able to easily get there? What was your experience of that, especially with the farmers?
Well, I think it's true to say that the mental health services, try as a government might, the mental health services are completely underfunded, under-resourced, and they're actually abysmal. Okay. Now that's in Perth. In the country, it's even worse. There's very little support. People try hard. The people are committed. They're doing their best, but it's grossly underfunded and under-resourced. So it depends on the individual clinicians. Now, fortunately, I'm interested in mental health. I thought seriously about going into that, but so I'm passionate about mental health, and so I could listen to people. And the gift of listening is very important. What's going on? Tell me more. Let's understand what's going on, and now see what can we do to help with this. Say, for example, you're going to lose the farm. It's been 3 generations, and you feeling guilty. It's been drought for 3 years, and the bank is now demanding, with no forgiveness whatsoever. The bank they're brutal. and they're taking everything away. How am I going to cope with this? And it's just understanding, okay, fine, medication, yes, we can do that, but let's sit down, have a cup of tea together, let's chat about this. Who's in your area? Who's actually holding you by the hand? Okay, if not me, who else is going to be holding you by the hand? And working together on this. We can work this out together.
Absolutely, and as a behavioural specialist, we know that hope is critical. And hopelessness is the black hole. So tell me a little bit about how you installed hope in people.
It depends on the individual themselves.
Okay.
How much they're able to think about this clearly. Now, if you are very anxious and very depressed, your thought processes have failed. Okay. You can't think properly. So the first immediate thing is to actually get some medication there to allow that to happen. Which reminds me, cannabis is probably really very helpful, but it's not so very good for depression itself. We need to give some antidepressants, if you like, in that moment and allow the thought process to settle. Then we can start interacting and seeing where we're going to go with this. In fact, I've referred people to you with this, with severe problems, and wonderfully managed as well, because you're now able to say, okay, there's a difficult situation here. What can be done? So rather than saying, what's a problem, you can say, what are the possible solutions we can look at? So changing the discourse from, there's a terrible problem that's looming upon me, now look at the solutions. What are the options available? What can we do? And the instant you do that, the problems become less, because now we're looking for solutions. And that's a very important start as well.
It's a classic reframe, we would call that, in the behavioural world. Now, you mentioned cannabis. Tell me a little bit about what you might use cannabis for as a rural doctor.
Well, it's only recently been allowed. So most of my time in the rural areas, cannabis was simply a banned, dangerous drug. Here, have some more heroin. I'm being a bit arch about that, but yes, it's. We even heard just recently how dangerous the opioids are. I've been saying this for decades, that we're allowing people to die with medication we freely give, but cannabis is banned. Now, you have to say we've been force-fed this diet of lies and propaganda over 90 years from the FBI. But ideally, we're looking at a healthy healing herb which can be misused.
Of course.
Now, once we begin to put down the barriers, we can now do some research, and the science is showing us just what we can do. Did you know, for example, that we have an endocannabinoid system throughout our bodies? Every vertebrate has that. And the purpose of that endocannabinoid system is to give balance in the body. It's in all organs of the body, including the skin. Now, we are able to see subtle differences, for example, in autism, Parkinson's disease, not just stress and anxiety and pain, which are wonderfully treated with cannabis, but a whole host of things. Gut health, for example, can be improved with cannabis. Now, people think, oh, cannabis, we're going to get high with that. Really? Here's a bottle of whiskey. If you want to finish it in one go, by all means, but maybe just a nip might be helpful.
Yeah.
You know, and alcohol, as I mentioned, that is probably the most dangerous thing we're taking there. So I'm mentioning here something which everyone says, oh yeah, whiskey. It's actually a lot more dangerous than cannabis.
Yeah.
Okay. So just putting that into some kind of context, your Valiums, your diazepams, your alprazolams, they're incredibly dangerous if they're used improperly and very easy to get addicted to. Cannabis doesn't. So putting this into context here of a medicine in my repertoire that can be safely used, although some people may abuse it, we ought to be using this much more regularly. In fact, because we need this for our own endocannabinoid system and we make our own cannabinoids, it could be argued that we ought to be taking more CBD, for example, to balance our bodies. It should be part of our natural diet, like eating cannabis as a herb. Like, for example, if we're taking, say, wheatgrass or we're taking a salad, we should be adding something like a cannabis or hemp, which would have the omega-3, 6, 9 oils, the cannabinoids, the healthy ones here, which allow us to retain balance in our body. Would that be a bad idea?
Not at all. And you know, it's interesting, in my field as a behavioural guy, I often see people who are, say, on opioids. Now, what we know is actually lower our window of tolerance. They lower our tolerance to pain. So the more we're killing pain, the more we're lowering our tolerance. Then when we get off those drugs, we've got such a low tolerance to pain, we feel everything. You see this especially in the elderly when they're fed a diet of opioids to manage pain. So of course people are going to get straight back on these medications again because they're in such pain, but ironically they've actually lowered their tolerance to the pain. So tell me a little bit more, tell the audience a little bit about, in layman's terms, the mechanism by which, because you've really got me curious now, the mechanisms by which the cannabis works. How does it work as opposed to say, other medications that we have?
Well, cannabis is useful for chronic pain, not for acute pain. So if you've got a headache, don't take cannabis.
So we separate those, yeah.
But if you've got ongoing pain, then using cannabis is very useful, either for taking the need for opiates completely out of the equation or allowing you to reduce the opiate burden. Now, we have an endocannabinoid system, and it works from the brain point of view at the synapses of the brain to improve, if you like, a neuronal function. So we can actually get a reduction in the perception of pain at the brain level.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So what you're saying is it's operating very efficiently.
It is restoring balance, and it is very efficient.
Yeah.
But one thing you can't do with cannabis is overdose.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense.
You can, of course, take too much of the THC. If you do that, you get anxiety or paranoia, which vanishes after a while, of course. But that's when it becomes less useful. But the cannabinoids themselves, you can't actually kill yourself with them. It doesn't stop you breathing. It is not a narcotic. It's very, very safe. You can take the whole bottle, if you like, of the oil. It's not going to kill you.
It's going to
Whereas
taste horrible.
a whole packet of Panadol will kill you.
Oh, yes, about 7 will harm you.
Yes, indeed, yes. So we're looking at this as a healthy substitute or an addition to our pharmacopoeia. Yesterday, for example, I had a patient come to me for the first time with terminal lung cancer and terrible pain. And so I had to increase his opiates because they weren't enough, because the palliative care hadn't given enough pain relief for draining the effusions. But I began to give some cannabis so that once this takes effect, the opiates can be reduced and you can get better sleep, so you recover better, you can get better pain management during the day, so your quality of life will be improved. Maybe not length of life, because it's terminal lung cancer, but the quality of that remaining life will be enhanced.
Absolutely. And look, thank you very much for today. It's been wonderful. You've been listening to Dr. Brian Walker, politician and the man, and my name is David, the Behaviorist, and we'll be back next week with another exciting episode of our chat. Thank you, my friend. Enjoy.